Imagine walking for days under a burning sun. Your feet split open on the sand. Your lips are dry. Your eyes sting. And you realize this isn't the Atlantic slave trade you learned about in school. This is what school never told you about the Arabic slave trade. Centuries before European ships arrived on African shores, caravans of chained men and women crossed the Sahara. No sails, no maps, no mercy. They moved from the heart of Africa to the Red Sea, to Oman, to Persia, to Arabia. It was a journey so brutal that many never reached the end. Those who fell behind were left for the desert to swallow. Their bones, still found beneath the sand today, tell the story schools never did. Could you imagine walking 1,000 miles with iron around your neck? Could you imagine being sold not for gold, but for a handful of salt? Because that's how little a human life was worth. This trade began as early as the 7th century. Arab merchants moved millions of Africans across the desert long before the first European slave ship even existed. They called it business. But behind every coin was a life dismantled, a child torn from a mother, a future rewritten. And while the Atlantic trade filled ships, the Arabic trade filled silence. No mass records, no memorials, no songs, just footprints in sand that time tried to erase. The journey was death disguised as travel. The desert wind cut skin like glass. People collapsed from thirst, heat, exhaustion. If you fell, no one helped you up. If you cried, the guards laughed. Some prayed for death to come quickly. Others stopped praying altogether. Imagine watching the person beside you collapse, a brother, a friend, and knowing that if you stopped to help, you'd die too. That was the choice. Keep walking or disappear. And for those who survived, the end was worse than the journey. Because at the end of the sand waited Damascus, Zanzibar, Cairo, Muscat, cities that today glitter with color once echoed with the sound of chains, hammers, and human voices being priced. Eyewitnesses like David Livingstone wrote of the markets of Zanzibar, up to 50,000 Africans sold every year. 50,000 in one city alone. Imagine the noise, shouting, crying, coins hitting wood as men, women, and children were traded like tools. Some went to the rich in Arabia, others to plantations in Oman. Some were kept in Zanzibar itself to work the clove farms that made their owners rich. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, blood, and fear. A mother begging to keep her child. A man staring at the floor, too afraid to look at the people buying him. That was reality, not from a movie, not from legend, but from history. Unlike the Atlantic trade that sought strong men for labor, the Arabic trade had a different demand. Women, young girls. They were taken by the thousands, not for the fields, but for the harems. They were considered status, symbols of wealth and desire. To own many women was to prove power. For every man taken, 3 women were taken. Their beauty became currency, their silence, expectation. Imagine being a mother one day and property the next. Imagine giving birth to a child who would grow up free while you stayed enslaved. Freedom, right beside you, but never yours. And for the boys, a darker fate waited. Castration. It was done in hidden camps, with no medicine, no mercy. 6 out of 10 boys died from bleeding. The others became eunuchs, forced to serve in palaces, guarding the very harems they could never enter. Each wound was profit, each scream, a coin. Some survived, many took their own lives. Even as Europe and America abolished slavery, it continued in Arabia for decades more. Saudi Arabia outlawed it only in 1962. But ending a law doesn't end a mindset. In some regions, Slavery lingered in silence long after the world pretended it was over. Zanzibar, now famous for turquoise water and white sand, was once a place of tears. Today, tourists sip cocktails near the same walls where chains once clinked. Smiles hide the ghosts. The ocean waves wash away what history won't confront. If the sea could speak, would it tell the truth? For over 1,000 years, between 10 and 18 million Africans were enslaved through this trade. 10 million lives, 10 million stories untold. And yet, there are no large communities of African descent in the Middle East today. No generations that carry their names, because men were castrated. Women's children were absorbed into their father's world, their African roots erased. It was not just slavery of bodies, it was the erasure of identity. Imagine losing not just your freedom, but the memory of your existence. Imagine your family name disappearing from history, as if you never lived at all. By the 1800s, entire regions of Africa were drained of life. Villages vanished. Populations dropped by nearly half. The continent's future was rewritten by greed. And when slavery ended, poverty remained. Because you can't rebuild a nation when its mothers and fathers are gone. Yet even today, slavery still breathes. Modern forms hide behind new words: labor, servitude, debt. Thousands of Africans still travel to Arab countries searching for work and find chains instead of paychecks. They clean homes, they serve coffee, they sleep on floors, forbidden to leave. Different century, same silence. Could you imagine if this happened to someone you loved? A cousin, a sister? Would you still call it history? Or would you call it now? We like to believe humanity learns, but the truth is, we forget fast. The Atlantic slave trade has museums, memorials, documentaries. The Arabic slave trade has dust, denial, and a few whispers online. Maybe it's easier that way, to hide the parts of history that don't fit our comfort, to pretend that pain fades when ignored. But the desert remembers. The wind still moves over graves no one marked. And every time a foot sinks into the Sahara, it presses against the bones of those who walked before. They say history is written by the victors, but sometimes the sand writes it better. So now that you know this story, the one school never told, the question is, what will you do with it?